The sun was shining brightly over Riverview that Sunday afternoon. The small town was peaceful, with families enjoying their weekend shopping at the local mall. Officer James Donnelly had been on the force for 8 years now. He took pride in keeping his community safe, though lately he'd been under pressure from his superiors to show better results with shoplifting cases that had been increasing in the area. He pulled his patrol car into the parking lot of Westside Shopping Center, adjusting his sunglasses as he scanned the area. The radio crackled with routine updates, but it had been a quiet day so far. Perfect time to be proactive, he thought. The dispatcher had sent out a notice earlier. Teenage girl, around 5'4", dark hair, wearing a red backpack, suspected of stealing electronics from several stores in the area. Officer Donnelly had been keeping his eyes peeled all morning, and that's when he spotted her, or so he thought. Standing outside the entrance of Tech Zone was a young girl who seemed to match the description. Sofia Martinez was checking her phone repeatedly, occasionally glancing at the store entrance. To Officer Donnelly, her behavior looked suspicious. Was she a lookout? Was she waiting for the right moment to go inside? What Officer Donnelly didn't know was that Sofia was simply waiting for her mother, who was inside buying a birthday present for Sofia's younger brother. The 16-year-old honor student had stepped outside to avoid spoiling the surprise, as her brother had been hinting about wanting the latest gaming console for months. Officer Donnelly parked his car and approached Sofia with a stern expression. "Excuse me, miss," he called out, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Could I have a word with you?" Sofia looked up from her phone, surprised. "Me?" she asked, pointing to herself. Her dark eyes widened as she noticed his uniform. "Yes, you," Officer Donnelly replied. "What are you doing hanging around here?" "I'm just waiting for my mom," Sofia explained, her voice steady despite her confusion. "She's inside shopping." Officer Donnelly noticed the red backpack at her feet. That was enough to convince him. "There have been reports of shoplifting in this area. Your backpack matches the description we received." Sofia shook her head. "I haven't stolen anything. I've been standing out here for the past 20 minutes. You can ask the security guard inside. He's seen me waiting here." Several shoppers slowed their pace, watching the interaction with curious eyes. An elderly couple whispered to each other, concern evident on their faces. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Officer Donnelly insisted, unmoved by her explanation. Sofia reached into her pocket and pulled out her student ID. "This is all I have with me. My mom has my other things." Officer Donnelly examined the ID card but remained unconvinced. The description matched too well, and he wasn't about to let another shoplifter slip away on his watch. Recent complaints about rising theft had put the entire department under scrutiny. "I'm going to have to detain you while we sort this out," he said, pulling out his handcuffs. Sofia's face paled. "What? No, I didn't do anything wrong. My mom is right inside. Can't we just wait for her?" "We'll contact your parents from the station," Officer Donnelly replied firmly, gesturing for her to turn around. A small crowd had gathered now. A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "Officer, I've been sitting at that bench for the past half hour. This girl has just been waiting here, not causing any trouble." Officer Donnelly hesitated for a moment, but then shook his head. "I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but we have protocols to follow." With trembling hands, Sofia turned around. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists as tears welled in her eyes. She had never been in trouble before, not even a detention at school. "Please," she whispered, "at least let me leave a note for my mom so she doesn't worry." "You can call her from the station," Officer Donnelly replied, leading her toward his patrol car. As they walked through the parking lot, Sofia held her head high despite the stares from onlookers. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. What she didn't know was that this mistake would soon turn Officer Donnelly's world upside down when he discovered exactly who her father was. The ride to the police station was the longest 15 minutes of Sofia's life. She sat in the back of the patrol car, the handcuffs digging uncomfortably into her wrists. Outside the window, familiar streets passed by: the bakery where her family bought Sunday morning pastries, the park where she studied under oak trees during spring. Now these familiar places seemed different, tainted by her current situation. Officer Donnelly kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Something about the girl's composure bothered him. Most teenagers he detained were either belligerent or sobbing uncontrollably. Sophia just sat there, back straight, occasionally blinking away tears that threatened to fall. "We'll sort this out quickly if you're telling the truth," he said, trying to sound reassuring. Sophia looked up, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I am telling the truth. My mom is probably worried sick by now." The Riverview police station was a small brick building with an American flag waving out front. When they arrived, Officer Donnelly led Sophia through the side entrance, away from the public lobby. The station was quiet for a Sunday, with only a few officers at their desks. Officer Williams, a more experienced cop with salt and pepper hair, looked up as they entered. His eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of the handcuffed teenager. "New shoplifting suspect?" he asked, setting down his coffee mug. "Matches the description we got about the tech zone thefts," Officer Donnelly replied. "Found her loitering outside with a red backpack." Officer Williams studied Sophia for a moment. "Interview room 2 is open." The interview room was small and chilly, with bare walls and a simple metal table bolted to the floor. There were 3 chairs, 2 on one side and 1 on the other. A large mirror covered most of one wall, which Sophia knew from TV shows was probably a window for others to observe. After removing the handcuffs, Officer Donnelly motioned for her to sit. "Wait here while we pull up the security footage from the store." Left alone, Sophia rubbed her wrists and fought back tears. Her mother must be frantic by now, probably running through the mall calling her name. She had never been in trouble with the police before. What would this mean for her college applications? For her scholarship chances? Outside the room, Officer Donnelly was pulling up the security footage on a computer while Officer Williams leaned against the desk. "She doesn't seem like our usual troublemaker," Officer Williams commented. "They never do until we catch them red-handed," Donnelly replied, though with less conviction than before. He clicked through various camera angles from TechZone, finally finding footage from earlier that day showing a shoplifter slipping electronics into a red backpack. Both officers leaned closer to the screen. The suspect was indeed a teenage girl with dark hair, but as they watched more carefully, the differences became apparent. The shoplifter was at least 2 inches taller than Sophia, with a rounder face and different walking style. Officer Williams frowned. "That's not the same girl. The one you brought in is shorter and her hair is longer." Donnelly felt a cold sensation in his stomach. They looked similar from a distance. "Did you check her ID properly? Run her name?" Williams asked. "I glanced at her student ID. She said her mom had her other things," Donnelly admitted. "I was going to process her here." Williams sighed. "Let me see that ID again." Donnelly handed over Sophia's student card from Riverview High School. It showed her name, Sophia Martinez, along with her photo and student number. "Martinez," Officer Williams repeated, something clicking in his memory. "We should call her parents right away. Did she give you a contact number?" Inside the interview room, Sophia had composed herself. When both officers returned, she noticed the change in their demeanor. "Sophia, we need to contact your parents," Officer Williams said, his tone noticeably gentler than Officer Donnelly's had been. "Can you give us your father's or mother's phone number?" "My mom doesn't have a cell phone," Sophia explained. "But my dad does. He's probably home from his weekend meetings by now." She recited her father's number from memory. "Your father's name is Carlos Martinez?" Officer Williams asked carefully. Sophia nodded. "Yes, he told me to always call him if I ever had any trouble." A hint of pride entered her voice. "He's very good at solving problems." Officer Donnelly, standing slightly behind his partner, hadn't made the connection yet. He was still thinking about the mistake he'd made in detaining the wrong person. "He's going to be very upset about this," Sophia added, looking directly at Officer Donnelly. "He's always telling me about people's rights." Officer Williams glanced at his partner, a warning look in his eyes, before turning back to Sophia. "I'll make the call right now." Officer Williams stepped out of the interview room, phone in hand. The hallway was quiet except for the distant ringing of phones and the hum of the air conditioning. He took a deep breath before dialing the number Sophia had given him. Something about this situation felt increasingly uncomfortable. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, measured voice answered. "Hello, this is Carlos Martinez." Officer Williams straightened his posture instinctively, though the man couldn't see him. There was something about that voice, a natural authority that commanded respect. "Good afternoon, Mr. Martinez," This is Officer Robert Williams from the Riverview Police Department. A brief pause followed. I see. Is everything all right, Officer Williams? No panic, no immediate anger, just calm inquiry. It wasn't the typical reaction from parents receiving calls from the police. Sir, your daughter Sophia is currently at our station. She was brought in for questioning regarding a shoplifting incident at Westside Shopping Center. Shoplifting? The man's voice remained level, but a note of surprise was evident. There must be some mistake. My daughter was shopping with her mother today. We're reviewing the situation now, sir. It appears there may have been a misidentification. I understand. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Please ensure that my daughter is comfortable until I arrive. Another pause. May I ask, has she been formally charged with anything? Was she read her rights? Officer Williams felt a growing unease. These were not typical questions from a concerned parent. These were questions from someone who knew the law. No charges have been filed, sir. We're still in the preliminary stages of investigation. I see. And the officer who detained her, did he have reasonable suspicion to do so? Was there direct evidence connecting her to this alleged shoplifting? The questions were pointed but delivered without hostility. Officer Williams glanced toward the interview room where his partner was sitting with Sophia. The detaining officer believed she matched a description we received, sir. We're reviewing security footage now. Very well. Please inform my daughter that I'm on my way. I'd also like to speak with the officer who made the detention and your supervising officer when I arrive. The call ended, and Officer Williams stood in the hallway for a moment, processing the conversation. He walked back to the computer where the security footage was paused and checked Sophia's student ID again. Martinez. The name had seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. Now it clicked. Judge Carlos Martinez, recently appointed to the federal bench. The judge who had made headlines last month for his ruling against the Springfield Police Department in a civil rights case. His stomach dropped. If this was the same Martinez. Officer Williams hurried back to the interview room and motioned for Officer Donnelly to step outside. We need to talk, he said quietly. In the hallway, Officer Donnelly noticed his partner's serious expression. What's wrong? Did you reach her parents? I just got off the phone with her father. He's coming down here now. Officer Williams kept his voice low. Did you run her name through the system before bringing her in? Donnelly shifted uncomfortably. I was going to do it when we got here. The description seemed solid, and I wanted to act quickly. Does the name Carlos Martinez mean anything to you? Officer Donnelly shrugged. Should it? The federal judge who ruled on the Springfield excessive force case last month. The one who's been all over the news for his stance on proper police procedure. The color drained from Officer Donnelly's face. You don't think? I just spoke to him on the phone. He's asking about reasonable suspicion, Miranda rights. He knows exactly what questions to ask. Officer Donnelly ran a hand through his hair. Are you sure it's the same Martinez? It's a common name. How many Carlos Martinezes do you know who can calmly discuss legal procedure when told their daughter's been detained? The realization hit Officer Donnelly like a physical blow. He'd detained a federal judge's daughter without following proper procedure. No formal reasonable suspicion, no call to her parents before questioning. He hadn't even properly verified her identity against the security footage before bringing her in. We need to tell the captain, Officer Williams said. Inside the interview room, Sophia sat with her hands folded on the table. She wasn't crying anymore. Instead, a small, knowing smile played at the corners of her mouth. She had seen the change in the officer's demeanor when she mentioned her father's name. Her dad had always taught her to stay calm in difficult situations. The truth has a way of coming to light, he would say. Now she was seeing that wisdom unfold in real time. The door opened and both officers returned. Their faces told her everything she needed to know. Your father is on his way, Officer Williams said gently. Word spread quickly through the small police station. Captain Thomas had been enjoying a quiet Sunday afternoon catching up on paperwork when Officer Williams knocked on his office door with the news. The captain's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. Judge Martinez? Federal Judge Carlos Martinez? Are you absolutely certain? Yes, sir. He's on his way here now. Captain Thomas set down his mug and stood up, straightening his uniform. And Donnelly detained his daughter without following proper protocol. without even verifying her identity against the security footage first. "I'm afraid so, sir." The captain closed his eyes briefly. "Where's Donnelly now?" "In the break room. He's pretty shaken up." In the break room, Officer Donnelly sat with his head in his hands. His career flashed before his eyes. 8 years on the force, a commendation for bravery last year during the Riverside rescue, his plans to take the sergeant's exam next spring. Could it all end because of one hasty decision? The door opened and Captain Thomas entered. His expression was grim. "Donnelly, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened. Every detail." Officer Donnelly explained how he'd spotted Sophia outside the electronics store, how she matched the general description they'd received, how he'd made the decision to detain her based on that description, and her red backpack. The captain's frown deepened. "And you didn't check her ID properly. You didn't call her parents before bringing her in for questioning." I was planning to process her here, sir." "Process her?" The captain's voice rose slightly. "She's a minor, Donnelly. We have protocols for a reason." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the front desk. "Captain, Judge Martinez has arrived." Meanwhile, in the interview room, Sophia had been given a cup of water and a concerned female officer had come to check on her. The atmosphere around her had shifted dramatically. No one was treating her like a suspect anymore. Through the window in the door, she could see officers straightening their uniforms and a flurry of activity in the hallway. Then she saw him, her father, walking with purpose through the station's corridor. Judge Carlos Martinez was not a physically imposing man, but he carried himself with unmistakable confidence. Dressed in casual weekend clothes, neat jeans, and a button-down shirt, he could have been any father coming to pick up his daughter. But something in his bearing, in the way officers nodded respectfully as he passed, revealed his position. The door opened and Sophia jumped to her feet. "Dad." Judge Martinez's stern expression softened immediately. He embraced his daughter, then held her at arm's length, examining her face. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay, Dad. Just scared." He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "Wait here a moment. I need to speak with the officers." In the captain's office, the air was thick with tension. Captain Thomas stood, extending his hand. "Judge Martinez, I want to personally apologize for this misunderstanding." The judge shook his hand firmly. "I appreciate that, Captain, but I'd like to understand exactly what happened today." His voice was calm, measured, the same voice he used in his courtroom. Officer Donnelly, standing near the back wall, felt sweat beading on his forehead. "Officer Donnelly," the judge said, turning to him. "You were the arresting officer." "Detaining officer, sir. No formal arrest was made," Donnelly corrected automatically, then winced at his own words. Judge Martinez nodded. "I see. And what evidence did you have that my daughter was involved in shoplifting?" The question hung in the air. Officer Donnelly swallowed hard. "She matched a general description we received, sir. Female teenager, dark hair, red backpack." "And did you verify this match with security footage before detaining her?" "No, sir. I verified it after." "I see." The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "And you detained a minor without contacting her parents first?" Each question was like a nail in Officer Donnelly's coffin. He had no defense. He had acted hastily, skipping crucial steps in proper procedure. "Show me the security footage," Judge Martinez said. They moved to the computer where the footage was still pulled up. The judge watched silently as the actual shoplifter, a girl who, truthfully, only vaguely resembled his daughter, slipped items into her bag. "This is your suspect," the judge said, pointing at the screen. "And this is my daughter." He pulled out his phone, showing a recent photo of Sophia. Standing side by side, the differences were obvious. The officers exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. "I believe we have a serious issue here," Judge Martinez said quietly. The station conference room was rarely used on weekends. Today, it held 5 people: Judge Martinez, Captain Thomas, Officer Donnelly, Officer Williams, and a nervous-looking young officer assigned to take notes. Sophia had been settled in the break room with a sandwich and her recovered phone, finally able to call her worried mother. Judge Martinez sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He hadn't raised his voice once since arriving, which somehow made the situation more tense. Officers who had dealt with angry parents knew how to handle shouting and threats. This calm, measured approach was far more unsettling. "Before we begin," the judge said, "I want to be clear about something. I'm here as Sophia's father first, not as a federal judge." Captain Thomas nodded gratefully. "We appreciate that, sir." "That said," Martinez continued, "I can't separate my knowledge of the law from my role as her father. What happened today raises serious concerns." He turned to Officer Donnelly, who sat with his hands folded tightly on the table. "Officer, I'd like to understand your thought process. Walk me through your decision-making step by step." Donnelly cleared his throat. "We received a report about a shoplifter at the mall. Female teenager, dark hair, red backpack. When I saw your daughter standing outside Tech Zone with a red backpack, she seemed to match the description. And then I approached her, asked what she was doing. She said she was waiting for her mother. Something about her behavior seemed suspicious to me." Judge Martinez's eyebrow raised slightly. What specifically seemed suspicious? Officer Donnelly shifted in his seat. "She was checking her phone frequently, looking around. Like a teenager waiting for her parent might do." Donnelly's face flushed. "In hindsight, yes. But at the time, with the description we had." The judge held up a hand. "Let's talk about that description. Female teenager, dark hair, red backpack. Do you know how many young women in that mall today might have matched that description?" The question hung in the air. No one answered. "Dozens at least," Martinez continued. "Such a vague description doesn't meet the threshold for reasonable suspicion. You need specific, articulable facts to detain someone." Captain Thomas jumped in. "Judge Martinez, I want to assure you that this isn't how we typically operate. Officer Donnelly has been under pressure lately with the increase in shoplifting incidents." "Pressure doesn't justify cutting corners with people's civil liberties, Captain," the judge replied. He turned back to Donnelly. "After you decided to detain my daughter, why didn't you verify her identity before bringing her to the station?" I should have," Donnelly admitted. "There's no excuse." For the first time, the judge's expression softened slightly. "You're right. There isn't an excuse. But there is a reason, isn't there? You were trying to be proactive, to solve a problem quickly." Donnelly looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. "I've seen this pattern throughout my career," Martinez continued. "Officers under pressure to produce results start taking shortcuts, but those shortcuts have real consequences for real people." He pulled out his phone and showed them a photo, Sophia at age 10, missing her front teeth, grinning proudly in her soccer uniform. "This is who you detained today, not a case number, not a suspect. A 16-year-old honor student who's never been in trouble a day in her life. A girl who wants to be a doctor someday." The room fell silent. The photo remained on the table, a reminder of the human impact of their actions. "When I was 16, Judge Martinez said, his voice softer now, I was detained by police while waiting for a bus. I matched a vague description too, young Hispanic male in a blue jacket. I spent 6 hours in a station before they realized I wasn't their guy." He looked directly at Officer Donnelly. "That experience changed me. It's why I went to law school. It's why I became a judge. And it's why I'm not going to file a formal complaint against you today." Everyone in the room looked up in surprise. "You're not?" Captain Thomas asked. "No. Filing a complaint won't undo what happened. It won't teach Officer Donnelly anything he hasn't already learned today." The judge leaned forward. "But I do have a different proposal, one that might actually make a difference in how your department operates going forward." Captain Thomas nodded eagerly. "We're all ears, Your Honor." Judge Martinez smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. "Good. Because what I'm suggesting will require commitment from everyone in this room." 2 days after the incident, the Riverview Police Department's training room was unusually full. Officers from every shift had squeezed in, some standing against the walls. At the front of the room stood Judge Martinez, dressed in a suit but without his judicial robes. Beside him was Captain Thomas, looking both nervous and hopeful. In the front row sat Officer Donnelly, notepad in hand. He'd barely slept since Sunday, replaying the events over and over in his mind. When the captain had called to tell him about the judge's proposal, he'd expected the worst. Instead, he found himself volunteering to help. "Thank you all for coming," Judge Martinez began. I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame. I'm here because what happened to my daughter on Sunday could have happened to anyone's child. He clicked a button, and a slide appeared on the screen behind him. It showed side-by-side photos of Sophia and the actual shoplifter caught on camera. These two young women share some basic features: dark hair, similar height. But the differences are clear when you look closely. The judge clicked to the next slide. This is what reasonable suspicion looks like in practice. It's not just dark-haired teenager with a backpack. It's specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable officer to believe a crime has been committed. For the next hour, Judge Martinez walked through real-world examples, court cases, and practical scenarios. He wasn't lecturing, he was teaching, asking questions, inviting discussion. Officers who had come in defensive gradually began to engage, sharing their own experiences and challenges. "I know you're under pressure to address shoplifting," the judge said, "but cutting corners doesn't help anyone. It damages community trust and can lead to legal problems for the department." Captain Thomas stepped forward, "Which is why we're implementing new protocols for dealing with suspected juvenile offenders. Officer Donnelly has been instrumental in helping develop these." All eyes turned to Donnelly, who stood up with a mix of embarrassment and determination. "What happened Sunday was my mistake. I was so focused on catching a suspect that I forgot who we're really here to serve: the community. Every person we detain is someone's child, someone's family member." He held up a new form. "This is our new juvenile detention checklist. Before any minor is brought to the station, we'll need to document the specific reasons for detention, verify identity when possible, and make immediate contact with parents or guardians." The room was quiet for a moment. Then, from the back, an older officer spoke up. "With all due respect, that's going to slow us down. We're already short-staffed." Judge Martinez nodded. "It will take more time, yes. But think about how much time was spent on Sunday dealing with a mistaken detention. Think about the potential liability if my daughter's case had gone differently." He walked to the center of the room. "I'm not just dropping by for one training session. I've committed to working with your department for the next 6 months. I'll be available to answer questions, review procedures, and help navigate the balance between effective law enforcement and protecting civil rights." After the session, Officer Donnelly approached the judge in the hallway. The conversation he'd been dreading all week couldn't be put off any longer. "Judge Martinez," he said, "I want to apologize again for what happened to your daughter." The judge studied him for a moment. "Officer Donnelly, do you know why I decided not to file a complaint against you?" "No, sir, I don't." "Because when I watched you review that security footage, I saw the moment you realized your mistake. I saw genuine regret, not just fear of consequences." The judge's voice was kind but firm. "That tells me you're the kind of officer who can learn from this." Donnelly swallowed hard. "I'd like to think so, sir." "Good, because I have one more request." The judge handed him a card. "Sophia's high school has a law and justice club. They've asked me to speak next month about citizens' rights during police encounters. I'd like you to join me." Donnelly stared at the card in disbelief. "You want me to speak to high school students? About this? Who better?" Judge Martinez smiled. "Someone who's learned the hard way has the most valuable perspective to share." As the judge walked away, Donnelly felt something he hadn't expected, not just relief that his career wasn't over, but a sense of purpose. Maybe this mistake, as painful as it had been, could become something meaningful. He tucked the card carefully into his pocket. The conversation with teenagers wouldn't be easy, but then again, the most important ones rarely were.